James's day began like any other. As the owner of a small logistics company, his warehouse was the heart of everything he'd worked so hard to create. Nestled on the outskirts of a suburban neighborhood, the facility was his pride and joy. Its large parking lot offered plenty of space for delivery trucks, employee cars, and his own vehicle, a perfect setup, or so he thought. That morning, however, as he pulled into the lot, something felt off. A cluster of unfamiliar cars greeted him, sedans, SUVs, even a minivan, scattered haphazardly across spaces clearly marked private property. Slowing his car, James took in the scene, puzzled. At first, he assumed it was a mistake, maybe an event nearby or an emergency overflow. But as he drove deeper into the lot, the truth hit him. Every single spot was taken. A delivery truck idled awkwardly at the entrance, unable to move forward. Frustration simmering, James parked on the curb and stepped out to investigate. Walking through the lot, he inspected the vehicles. None bore any connection to his business. A few had stickers from the nearby residential community, a neighborhood run by a homeowners association, HOA, he'd rarely dealt with. Though close to the houses, his warehouse was deliberately separate, chosen for its distance from residential distractions. Pulling out his phone, he called his assistant, Lisa. "Did someone approve parking here for an event or something?" he asked, his voice edged with irritation. "No, James," Lisa replied. "I was wondering the same thing. Some of the team already called about not finding spots. We've got delivery scheduled today. What do you want to do?" James sighed. "Let me figure it out. I'll call you back." Determined to get answers, James headed to the HOA's community center, a short walk into the neighborhood. The area was pristine, flower beds neatly trimmed, fences freshly painted, roads smooth and well-maintained. Clearly, the HOA had money to burn. Inside, a receptionist greeted him with a polite smile, oblivious to the chaos her group had caused. "I need to speak to someone in charge," James said sharply. "There's an issue with my warehouse parking lot." The receptionist's smile wavered. "Of course, sir. Let me see if Ms. Harper, our HOA president, is available." Moments later, James sat across from Ms. Harper, a composed woman in her late 40s with an air of authority. He explained the situation, but her expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," she said at last, "but our residents have limited parking and your lot often sits empty. We thought it'd be a good overflow option." James stared, incredulous. "You thought? Without asking me? That's private property. You can't just decide to use it." Ms. Harper's tone grew firm. "The HOA has the authority to act for the community's benefit. Your lot's right next to us. It seemed logical." Anger flared in James. "Logical? It's trespassing. My business depends on that lot. Trucks can't even get in because of your residents' cars. You didn't even consult me." She waved a hand dismissively. "We assumed you wouldn't mind since it wasn't fully used." James leaned forward, voice steady but hard. "I do mind. You've got 48 hours to tell your residents to clear the lot. After that, I'll take action." Ms. Harper's face darkened. "Mr. Turner, I'd think carefully before escalating this. The HOA has resources, and we're within our rights." Standing, fists clenched, James shot back, "You're not. And I'll prove it." The meeting ended tersely, and he stormed out, a mix of disbelief and fury churning inside him. How could the HOA justify this overreach? Back at the warehouse, Lisa and the staff awaited updates. "They're claiming they can use our lot," James explained, still heated. "But they can't. I gave them 48 hours. If they don't fix it, we're towing every car." Lisa nodded. "Good. This is absurd." Over the next 2 days, James watched as cars continued to fill his lot. Residents came and went, some waving casually, oblivious to his warnings. By the second evening, the situation worsened. Cars blocked the warehouse doors, a final straw. James called his lawyer, Daniel, to ensure his next steps were airtight. After discussing options, he posted bold, "No parking, private property. Violators will be towed," signs around the lot, snapping photos as evidence. That night, he slept fitfully, bracing for the showdown ahead. The next morning, James woke early, resolve outweighing his anger. The lot was still packed, a blatant defiance of his warnings. He tried one last time to avoid escalation, calling Ms. Harper directly. "The cars are still here," he said, keeping his tone even. I'd like to settle this without tow trucks or lawyers, but you need to act now. After a pause, her voice came back clipped. Mr. Turner, the HOA has a duty to its residents. Parking there is a temporary fix to a bigger issue. We've told people it's fine. We think it benefits everyone. James's jaw tightened. Everyone? What about my business? My trucks can't even reach the dock. This isn't a negotiation. It's trespassing. Her reply was sharp. I'd watch your tone. We're within our rights. Cutting her off, James snapped. You're not. If those cars aren't gone soon, I'll enforce my rights. He hung up, heart pounding. That morning, James documented everything. Photos of cars with visible plates, videos of the chaos, shots of the ignored signs. Daniel had stressed evidence, and James wasn't taking chances. A few residents approached as he worked. One woman, loading groceries, waved cheerfully. Good morning. James nodded politely but stayed silent, her nonchalance fueling his frustration. By noon, he'd had enough. He called a towing company, explaining the situation and confirming legalities. They assured him they'd handled similar cases and would send trucks the next morning. James briefed his team in the break room. This ends tomorrow, he said firmly. I've given the HOA time. They've ignored it. Tow trucks are coming. We'll have our lot back. The staff cheered, Lisa adding, You've been more patient than most. That evening, James returned to the lot, spotting new cars, including an SUV sprawled across 2 spaces, blocking the dock. It was a slap in the face. Though towing would bring relief, he felt a pang of regret, knowing residents would be furious. Still, he'd followed every step: warnings, signs, documentation. The HOA had forced his hand. As the sun set, he stood at the lot's edge, ready for what lay ahead. The towing began early. James arrived before dawn, nerves mixing with determination. At 7 a.m., the towing crew rolled in. The lead driver, Mike, shook James's hand. You weren't kidding about the mess, he said, eyeing the crowded lot. We've got 4 trucks ready. Got the paperwork. James handed over a folder, deed, signed photos, the HOA letter. Mike nodded. Looks tight. We'll start with the dock blockers. The clank of chains and hum of engines filled the air as cars were hauled away. Mike documented each tow meticulously, leaving no room for dispute. As the sun rose, residents emerged. A woman in a bathrobe, coffee in hand, stormed up. What's happening? My husband's car. He needs it for work. James stayed calm. This is private property. The HOA had no right to let you park here. I gave them 2 days to fix it. They didn't. Call the towing company to get it back. She huffed and stomped off. Soon, a crowd gathered, voices rising in anger. James handed Lisa flyers with towing info. Just give these out. Don't argue, he instructed. By mid-morning, the lot was nearly clear, a victory amid the chaos. Then Ms. Harper arrived, flanked by board members, her face a mask of fury. Mr. Turner, what is this? You had no right to tow our residents' cars. James faced her. I had every right. This is my property. You ignored my warnings. I followed the law. If anyone's wrong, it's the HOA for misleading people. She bristled. You'll regret this. We'll sue if we have to. James crossed his arms. Go ahead. I've got everything documented. Try me. A board member tried to mediate, but James cut in. No deals. The lot's off limits. End of story. Ms. Harper stormed off, defeated for now. By afternoon, the lot was back to normal. Employees parked, deliveries flowed. James felt pride in standing firm, though he knew the fight wasn't over. The next day, a letter from the HOA arrived, accusing him of disrupting the community and threatening legal action. Daniel laughed it off. They've got nothing. We'll shut this down. James stayed vigilant, posting on the HOA's forum to clarify his stance, sparking a heated debate. Some residents backed him, others didn't. A fellow business owner, Tom, shared a similar HOA battle, urging James to hold firm. Soon, flyers from the HOA appeared, smearing James and calling for a boycott. Furious, he documented them and consulted Daniel, who suggested a cease and desist letter. The dispute hit the local news after a journalist, Sarah, interviewed James. The story, HOA overreach sparks property rights fight, gained traction, exposing Ms. Harper's tactics. At an HOA meeting, James faced her again, calmly dismantling her narrative. Residents turned on the board, demanding accountability. Days later, Ms. Harper resigned, and the HOA apologized, promising reform. Standing in his quiet lot, James reflected. The fight had been draining, but it taught him resilience. He'd won, proving fairness sometimes demands a stand.